We are live.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Education Policy Committee meeting. Today is Tuesday, January 3rd. Time is now 5:02, and we are back for the new year. So I want to welcome everybody back and Happy New Year to everyone. I know that we had a little bit of a break, but we're here to get started once again. With me this evening, I have Board of Education Vice Chair Godfrey Azima, Board Member Janine Randolph, Board Member Mary Ellen Flaherty, and from the team, we have Ralph Valenzizi and Barbara Namani. And the first item on our agenda is actually approval of minutes. Did everyone get a chance to read the minutes? Any changes, corrections?
Yes, they look good to me.
They look good to me. Godfrey?
No change
Janine?
on my end.
Janine?
All good to me.
Okay, motion to approve minutes. From Mary Ellen. I didn't see you. Seconded by,
Second.
thank you, Janine. All in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, so that's unanimous. Thank you for that. I don't have any public comments. Is there anyone online for public comments this evening? Okay, thank you. And now, tonight we are going to discuss the School Governance Council policy, and I am switching the meeting over to Ralph. Thank you, Ralph.
Okay, great. Thank you, Diana, and good evening, everybody. So tonight, we're going to take some time to actually walk through our School Governance Council policy. As you know, in the state of Connecticut, there are certain schools that have to have a governance council, and a number of years ago, we decided in Norwalk that we wanted to make sure that all of our schools have governance councils. So we developed a policy specifically for that as we move forward with that process. With the adoption of new policies, there is no, in the model policies, there is no specific school governance council policy. People just follow state mandates. So we're looking to now just re-adopt our old school governance policy. We took some time though to clean up do the same thing that we've done with all of our other policies as we brought them back, is clean up the language. And we'd like to actually walk you through a number of the changes that we made in our policy in reference to how it affects all of our schools. We did have a couple of items in there that were maybe redundant to areas of other policies. So those were kind of, we kind of redlined those out. We also reviewed this with Tom Mooney and asked him for his feedback as well on suggestions, as well as articulations to referencing, where certain things in the policy came from, how you can find them online. So those are the types of changes we made to the policy. And with that, I guess I can, Barbara, you want me to pass it off to you? I mean, I can share out my screen if you'd like.
Here, I just have a question before we go farther. Ralph?
Hold on one second. I just want to make a note that Tom Mooney is our legal counsel for the public that doesn't know that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. My question, Ralph, is just a little more of the history. Are you saying that we didn't have the SGCs for all the schools until 5 years ago or a little while ago? We had them just maybe for high schools. Well, could you just give that little history?
So
for us,
a number of years ago back, and I think it started in probably about 2011, 12, schools that were considered, in high need schools, or that were, now we use our accountability index, but that were not in compliance with the state. They had issues where they had gaps in their testing or other areas, were required to develop a school governance council meeting. So these were schools that were on our state list. So we did have
so that's not grade level. It was high needs level or non-compliant levels.
Yes, or yes, you're right. Or your scores, you had a discrepancy in your scores between your high need students and your regular students. The type of stuff that we now measure through the accountability index.
Okay.
We had a number of schools that fell into those categories that were in need of improvement. Those schools were the ones that were required by the state in any district to have a school governance council, and that those governance councils were deemed, there were certain requirements that were given to us by the state on what those governance councils look like. As we move more to a site-based model, we decide as a district that every school needs to have that school governance council model in place. So we actually developed our own policy, and that's what we're reinstating tonight, or talking about tonight, about bringing up to the board, about reinstating that policy once again, with just some updates. So it's just been.
Okay. I very much appreciate that context.
Sure.
And so Ralph, I think you were asking if I wanted to share my screen, which I'm happy to do so.
Oh, sure. Yeah. If you want, or me, either one. So.
Yeah, just because if I'll be talking about it, it's probably just easier if I
Okay.
use mine, right? Can we see the board policy? Is it nice and clear for everybody?
I can enlarge it with my fingers, so I don't know about anybody else.
Okay, that's good for me.
It's good.
All good on mine.
Yeah, okay, excellent, great. So as Ralph said, this is once again a policy that we had prior to this that we're re-implementing with just some edits and changes to make sure that we are aligning with what the state statute requires, maintaining reasonable goals. So in terms of this board policy, the changes that we've made are reflected when generally we've highlighted them in yellow and we put a line through them so that you can see what the language is that we are changing or removing. Obviously, the purpose of the SGC, we don't want to change that. I think this language is consistent with the purpose of a school governance council. And it's just kind of like a broad understanding of what school governance councils do. So we haven't made any changes to that portion. Likewise, we have not made a change to the definition of what an SGC is in terms of it being a support, in terms of decision-making, devoted to helping schools achieve their mission and vision, right? And the SGCs, remember, act as an advisory capacity. They don't make final determinations or decisions. And so the language is consistent throughout the policy. So here, now if we're looking at membership, school governance council shall consist of 14 members plus up to 3 non-voting members, depending on the type of school involved. To ensure that there's consistency across the district, we've just stated that this is going to be the number of council members, of members in the SGC for any school. And I think what Ralph stated earlier is that some schools were required to, some schools weren't. This ensures that all schools have this sort of consistent plan. Right. And again, nothing is changing here in terms of defining who the member is, defining what the election process is, defining the number of members, right? So for parent or guardians, you're going to have 7. This talks about how they're elected. For teachers, they're going to be at the school. You have 5 elected by teachers of the school. You have community leaders and the school principal.
Yes, that's an important fact there, that it's not changed. This was the policy we already had, and we're just tweaking it a little bit.
I have a question. Was it considered at all, or did we consider any changes, such as considering changes in these numbers, considering that it's getting more and more difficult to find people to fill the positions? I think both in the parent level and the teacher level.
So these are numbers actually for the ones that are required by the state. These are the numbers that the state required. So we decided to try and keep that consistency
Okay, all right.
amongst them. That's why, yes. But that was brought up to us that, there's sometimes a little bit more of a difficulty of trying to get people involved and stuff, because it can be a large number, especially for an elementary school.
Right. Thank you.
All members are equal partners and making recommendations. Again, remember, recommendations, not making final determinations. All council recommendations are made by a majority vote of these voting council members in attendance, and that's just the general process. So here is originally under requirements, the language read, all members shall be required to participate in initial and annual training sessions provided by the district. And so the minor change we've made is to participate in training sessions because we want to ensure that there is a training, but there doesn't necessarily have to be, ongoing training. And generally we're doing it at least once a year with all our SGCs because you're taking into account that there's new members, but we don't want to set standards that aren't required by the state in terms of making an initial and annual training sessions, right? So that right there puts us at 2. But we want to make sure that at least once a year, everyone is getting the information. And so this language kind of keeps that in mind.
Yeah, and I do think, Barbara, just from a historical perspective, when we did this and it was our first run through this, I think that's how the initial kind of came in there instead of just annual. So that's why we also just want to be clear.
And can you explain a little bit the training sessions?
Well, I think, that probably Rob could probably explain it better than I can at the moment. I know that he's been actually organizing the training sessions. And just so you know, as a follow-up, we will be having our training sessions at the end of this month for our SGCs. There's 2 nights. I don't remember the night specifically that the groups are broken up into. The training sessions really will go through the process of what is an SGC, what are their roles and responsibilities. And it's very similar to you would think of it as a board training. The kind of onboarding that you would normally do as a board is similar to what we would be doing with our SGCs. And we have a consultant that's going to be working with us through that process.
Thank you.
And Ralph, so I'm clear, the consultant's going to be working through the process of designing the onboarding training for SGCs? Or
Yeah, and really think of it the same way as like having Peter Gorman come in, working with us on, what are the roles and responsibilities of a board? But they'll be using this policy as the guide to be able to make sure that they cover what are SGCs expected to do, what should be their responsibilities, just really the basics.
I appreciate this, and I think it's great that we are, in the direction of shaping what it looks like here in Norwalk. Because I do think it's, such a very impactful role that people get themselves involved within the district simply because of how directed it's to the school community. And it's one I appreciate greatly. But hearing just some of what Janine asked in her initial question around membership, and what I understood it to be was reflective of some of the challenges that have been experienced thus far. I understood it to be the question, how much of the dynamics of that is captured, does it, high school and elementary, different time investment, but these are just questions, and another question I had is just,
and I think it's definitely, and Godfrey, I think one of them will be addressed in the next statement where we talked about, because one of the issues we had was, getting people to join because we had in our policy that they were supposed to meet every month. And that's a big commitment And there was nothing from a state guideline that said we had to meet every month. I mean, you can meet 4 times a year and still be just as effective. So that's really where that's one of the I guess I just jumped ahead of you, Barbara, but that's the next
No, that was the
change
next
right
line.
now.
Yeah, that was the next change. So you're right on target, Ralph.
So and that's exactly what we're trying to do, Godfrey, is make sure that we actually make it so we can get more people also involved and know that the commitment's reasonable for them, because that time commitment was very, very difficult for many people.
The
Okay.
concern I was worried about was in having to have one in the absence of some of those demonstrated interest, to be on board, being mindful of challenges for just, getting family participation in schools. If there isn't, oftentimes the elections and processes become held, I don't want to say out of compliance, but in a manner that isn't helpful to kicking off the governance process at a point in the year that they can be impactful. It either gets delayed, gets held out. I only say all this because I think articulating the purpose of family involvement, and if there's a different way, it can also be included. That's as important as school governance, because if you don't have a school with parents that are interested in it, there's a challenge that presents itself. We're pulling teeth to get people on board, and I just want to be mindful of where the purpose may get lost or interrupted for how they plan to go forward. If it's so hard to get that input or participation.
I have a question too with the participation part. Is there anywhere, or do we discuss the fact that what if we don't have the full 14 members? Do we continue, is that SGC still active? And do we continue looking for parents to be on the SGC, and can they be voted in at any point in time if we're under the 14?
That's actually a good question. I think the assumption is that we do have to have a full SGC in order to function, just that would be the expectation. But if a building does not have that, we'll get some clarification specifically on that. And I think that could possibly come out. I think some of those things would come out of the training as well on, what are going to be our operational procedures around, if a board member steps down, and then does there need to be an election, or do you just wait till the next, till the next cycle to fill that spot?
A council member.
Excuse me.
Ralph, I have a question on this paragraph, or Barbara, excuse me. You've crossed through the three consecutive meetings. So we don't want to knock people out, but
Exactly.
shall meet monthly. What has been happening in the last, say, 2 years? Have the SGCs been meeting 5 times a year, or do you have any connection to what the reality has been over the last 2 years?
I don't have any specific data, but I do know that they've been trying to meet on a monthly basis. I think everybody's been trying to make sure that they stick to the regulations that have been in place up to now.
Yeah, I think so too, Ralph. I think everybody's been trying to do the once a month.
Yes. Yeah. I think the harder part has been just filling seats for that once a month,
And so maybe bringing it to meet regularly and not meet so often might be easier to fill the seats. If it's once a semester, once a quarter, something like that. Once a quarter might be okay. So I'm just agreeing with the crossing out of what you've done. I think that opens up a little wider appeal for parents.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And that was the feedback that we had gotten, which we knew that it was just too much of a commitment for them to be able to do that at that pace. And we hope that that'll help generate more people to join as well.
And also then we remove the need to, after 3 absences, then you forfeit your council membership. Like, we don't want to penalize or have some sort of punitive response for people who can't meet monthly and who are
Exactly.
interested in being on these councils. So
Exactly.
hopefully this will be more of an enticement for people to participate.
Sounds good.
So now we're going to move on to election in terms of members. There has been no change, any substantive change here. The only thing that we did provide was the SGC guidance from the state on the election process, which is outlined here, but we included the link, which is always great, right? And then we added this area where it says student members shall be elected by the student body. Just so that language is consistent with the election process up here. I don't think there's really that much that we need to discuss unless anybody has any questions about that.
You know,
and again,
I
most
think-
of, oh, sure. Go ahead.
In terms of what we structure, we as the board, pertaining to how the governance councils operate and function, part of me believes that it should be more explicit, our expectations of, what the roles and what it looks like, just so it's clear the why behind why is it we're slating time and resources for training individuals, what content about the school and population should be consistently included and when should that be offered. Just being my consideration of some of the purposefulness behavior that happens around budget decisions that are made and understanding where the school's goal is and how that feeds into what direction the principal has for the school. I think the timing of when someone on board is important to understand why they're making these decisions about the school budget and with the resources in front of them. I think, some standardizing in our expectations will be helpful for us to enforce, where there are gaps in this. It might be how I want to term it, or I just think we should be more clearer in order to help the governance councils be clear in understanding what's mandated in front of them and the purpose behind this.
And what their role is within
Yeah.
this council. And so maybe like a little bit further down, maybe some of this language here might clarify that. But if not, we can kind of discuss, right? So the
Like,
roles. and
Robert's Rules of Order for board members, we understand the importance of why we post agendas, the timeline for posting our committee meeting videos. That's an example I'm bringing up of it's an expectation we want to place on governance councils and, the meetings, to assure that they're accessible to the public community of that school. Because again, it's meant to represent the needs at large, and if we're not assuring it's accessible.
Well, wouldn't that fall under regulation and be part of the training, not necessarily have to be detailed in this one? Because even with us, we're not detailed in our bylaws like that, and regulations are very different for us, like you said about meetings. But I agree that it should be, especially the part of trying to get parents involved, because it should be equitable across the board of all types of families. And I know that that's hard too because of the language barrier.
Well, and so just so you know, Diana, one of the things that I've been working on with Dr. Estrella is making sure we have interpretation at these similar to what we do for our board meetings. And trying to build out a budget for it has been the piece, but I mean, just making sure that we actually put these pieces in place. We do want to make sure, and I think that it's been a conscious effort on Dr. Estrella's side to make sure that everybody has access to what we're seeing. But I'm hearing what you're saying, Godfrey. If I'm hearing it correctly, it's the operational expectations that are things that we really need to address. And I do think that comes in board with the training. So I can bring that up with Rob as he's meeting with the consultant to make sure that that's part of the what they go through. But I do believe that that kind of stuff is the role, the purpose, how you're supposed to act, why we're here is the stuff that actually does happen in the onboarding training and the annual training.
I think that was responsive, Godfrey, no?
How explicit we are about it. To Diana's point, we don't have a set of policy or bylaws that we've written, but we are clear what it is, for expectations that have to be met for how we operate and conduct our meetings. We know where to reference policy. And I don't know if that is clear for the current governance councils, and also being able to adapt that to the school community level. We know there are variations and things that operate and take place in a high school versus an elementary school. And just want to be mindful to having things that acknowledge some of those unique aspects of the school population, time limitations, and also our expectations. Is it what we do in our meetings we expect to happen in governance councils or not?
Understood.
They're excellent points.
Is there a reason that we do things differently at the high schools than opposed to the other schools? Like the elections?
Yeah, I was just thinking of that too, Janine. Why do we have a different time for the same council? So in the fall for the high school and then in May for the rest.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was anything in particular.
There actually was a rationale. I think it was in the fall, potentially because students are also involved. Was one of the issues with getting them on the council.
But
I'd have
I
to go
mean,
back.
students are there in May also.
Yeah, let me go back and find out exactly why the discrepancy is between the two.
Yeah, I don't remember why, but I also know that the other groups in the high schools are in the fall.
Yeah, there was definitely a rationale when it was done. So
Is it because of the high school students that are seniors and there's a concern that like at the end of, if you're doing it at the end of the year, some of the high school students on the boards are juniors and seniors on the board, on the council. But Ralph, you would know more, I guess.
yeah, no, and to be honest, I just don't remember. I'm trying to think back on what there was definitely a rationale why there was a difference in the election periods between the two. I will go back and find out though.
We'll remember tonight.
Exactly.
Ralph, wait a second. Oh, good. You can hear me. One of the things I'm thinking about is that this election for the two high school students might occur at the same time that they have elections for student government instead of a separate time. So that would make more sense instead of getting the whole school voting for two kids just for this. If it's happening at the same time as student council elections, I could see that working, but I don't know. I don't know what happens on the ground there. So I think that might be part of the consideration.
Yeah, and I do feel it had something to do with the students itself. Why that? You're right. It has something along those lines of why.
Right. So if we could look at that concept of having the students elected by the whole student body, that I just want to look at that. It seems like quite a burden on a high school to have an election only for these two things. For these two positions. So if it could happen coordinated with student council, or it could be some part of the student governing themselves, a student council, some part of that group would automatically become part of the SGC. You know, like the president and vice president, something on that line. But I just don't want to make extra work for the high school administration.
Well, it's never been extra work because it just automatically, it's already in place. We're not making changes. So these have already been done in these dates. There is a reasoning why it was separated. I just can't remember why, but we're not creating
Okay.
extra responsibility or timing or anything like that.
Yeah,
I
this
Okay,
just
isn't a
can't
change.
think of why it is, but it has to do with, like you said, no, the timing or the overlap of something. And I, I can't even think as to why, but it was done
Alright.
purposely to be able to make it easier.
All right. So efficiency is the thrust of my question.
Yes.
You know, I was just looking at the statute really quick to see if there was anything I could see about this, but nothing's jumping out.
No, it was a local thing, Barbara.
Yeah.
There was actually rationale of doing it at 2 different times, and I honestly just don't remember what it is.
Okay. So moving on to the roles and responsibilities. Again, there's been no change to any of this language. But if we look at, so wait, does anybody have any questions about the roles and responsibilities before we move on to duties of council members? So the council collectively shall, originally it stated, provide advice and recommendations to the school administrator regarding a variety of matters. We've just kind of streamlined this language so it's more aligned to what the statute says, right? And so that there's no confusion, the council collectively shall serve in an advisory capacity to the school administration regarding, and then we're going to go through the matters listed below, because this is what they are providing. This is what they're providing advice to in terms of administration, right? So conducting at least one meeting per year to which all parents and teachers of the school are invited, at which the vision, mission, and goals for the school shall be discussed and evaluated.
So
Question, do all SGCs participate in reviewing the school-based budget or giving input, before it's submitted or giving a chance to give feedback about the school-based budget, the principal? That's
So
a
the
question.
council members, it is required to review the fiscal objectives of the draft budget for the school and providing advice to the principal of the school before such budget is submitted to the superintendent. So that's direct language from the state statute. And I think that's kind of responsive to what you would be asking in terms of what is their input for the budget at each local school.
And is that what's happening at all the schools now? And is only asking to be mindful of, how others may interpret what that is. Reviewing, giving feedback, just, the statement to me seems fine. But I only asked the question just to make sure if there's any misunderstanding
So-
of what is across the 3 school grade levels. It is just verbiage that's worth clarifying.
Yes, and I think that's kind of what we, with the duties of the council members, overarchingly, one of the things, if you see any change in here in the language, it doesn't change their role. It better explain that they're in an advisory role for certain areas. They're an advisory role for accounting, budget. They're an advisory role for our accountability. So, student achievement, and they should be aware of what's going on and being able to help advise in that area. And they're also in an advisory role, not making the choice, but with the school leader. So I think they're in an advisory role with that, with the school leader piece. But otherwise, though, I think some of the stuff that was in there was overarching into really what school administration should really be looking at as a whole. So I think hopefully, Godfrey, that explains a little bit more that, we're trying to streamline this and make sure that people understand what the role is. I think I'm getting at did that kind of answer your question, or?
So are you getting at number 5? So no longer assisting principal and in the process? Whoops.
Well, if we were going to go through the duties, Barbara talked about the first one, which was conducting one meeting, and this was one that we really wanted to bring up for discussion, whether or not we want to keep that, or is it too redundant to say that they should have one meeting around mission vision. It's fine to leave that. That's why it hasn't been crossed out, but it's just been highlighted. So it can go either way. It's however you feel. 2, 3, and 4 are all ones that should still be in there. Those are really their responsibilities. Looking at data, as I mentioned before, accountability, data and achievement of students is a role of the council. They should be looking at fiscal objectives, budget, as Godfrey, as you mentioned, and they should also be participating in the process for a school leader and administrators. Once again, not being the decision maker, but actually being the process to be able to be in an advisory capacity.
Providing advice. Yeah.
So
And again,
the overreaching is for in the selection process of teachers. The teachers are not the school leaders. They're not vice principals or principals.
Yeah.
So, and is that when we compare what the state is saying and what we wrote, are we eliminating anything that the state requires?
absolutely not. No.
No.
And we specifically reviewed the state statute before making any changes to this to make sure that none of these specific duties that are outlined in the state statute get eliminated or removed. Obviously, our board policy has to comply with state guidelines.
If
Okay,
anything,
but-
we're now more in alignment with state
Yeah.
policy.
Right. So we were, let me ask you this. The hiring process is laborious at any time, and even now more so than ever because of the pandemic and the shortage of teachers. So this part, if they were involved also in selection process of teachers and giving their recommendations, that would be another layer of work, which I think they would be relieved to not have that. But still that they would maintain their assistance in the leadership of the school. So am I understanding that right? Because that does make sense to me.
Yes, that's correct.
So we're not truly taking away the essence of it. It seems to me school leadership is the school governance would like to have a say in who the principal might be or who else might be hired in leadership, much more so than who's going to be the teacher.
Yes. That's correct.
Really, any changes are to like enhance the true meaning when this statute was enacted. So we've tried to make changes that, one, are more in alignment, but two, take unnecessary burdens off of those members who are willing to participate in the SGC.
Can we go back to number 1? It seems to me the essence of that is talking about, study groups, and maybe, does it come up later, a survey of parents? Maybe we can shorten number 1 under the duties of council members. So conducting one meeting a year. Everyone is invited about the vision, mission, and goals of the school year to be discussed and evaluated. The council can use results of such meetings to guide in its appointment of committees. So is there someplace later on that talks about surveys? That does seem to be redundant. If I read this earlier today, I thought there was something about a survey that the SGC got school surveys and then used some of that information.
Yeah, so we use the panorama surveys that actually the schools with their governance councils. That's the ones that they review.
Okay, I
Um,
wasn't sure if it was a school-wide, excuse me, a district-wide survey, or it was a school-wide survey. So you just answered the question. They use the panoramic one.
Yeah, it would be the district-wide surveys is the ones that we'd want them to use. I mean, but once again, that language that was put in there for number one isn't
Yes.
really needed. It doesn't hurt to have that there. That's the reason we didn't strike it out immediately and just wanted to know whether or not to
Continue with it.
what your feeling is that do we want to keep that in or
My vote on that is that the first sentence is good, and the second sentence is, it would be obvious to somebody working in this that they're going to set up study groups or task force. So that seems to be a little extra. That's how I'm
Yeah.
reading it.
Right, so the language that I've highlighted in red, you're saying,
Correct. Goes. More details come in other sections and.
I don't know if I agree with that,
Okay, go ahead.
only because in other sections it's not stated as exactly the way this is stated. So, you know how sometimes even when you're reading something, it can be said in two different ways, but you're reading both differently. But that's just me.
So for just as I'm reading
Let
it,
me reread.
okay, so I'll let you reread and then I have something to say.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I was reading this earlier today and this did seem like a lengthy part, because I see most of the schools dealing in some way with school improvement studies, and this just seems to reflect that.
So you're saying that this should be part of the training?
Yes, yes. It's just it's part of the duty is to conduct at least one of their meetings that everybody talks about the vision, the mission, and goals of the school. That's a duty. And then how to go about it seems to be
The training part.
in the training. Yeah.
Okay.
What do you think, Janine?
Well, I like the way you put it that way, at the end. That'd be more part of the training as opposed to just removing it completely. It
Mhm.
seems to make sense. And that first part definitely being the duty.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see that.
Yep, agreed. Godfrey?
Yeah, it didn't stand out to me as anything that needed any intentional problem solving to clarify. Because it just naturally occurs in the
Mm-hmm.
execution of roles and responsibilities, but the piece that I didn't notice was explicit mention of family or parent involvement. I always thought that was one of the charges behind the purpose of the governance council, was to also consult, advise the principal on how to increase leverage, have different opportunities for family engagement. And I was familiar with seeing it specified outside of the umbrella statement of a school improvement goal, but I always remember seeing it like that. I'm only saying that aloud because I could be wrong, but I just wanted to put that out there to the group and ask, should that be explicitly mentioned? Is that still a burning charge? People understand of the governance councils?
Well, would that be the student governance councils or the PTAs and PTOs that are always trying to bring in the families to try to get them involved in the school environment and other activities? Because I'm thinking the student governance council does other things besides trying to get, families involved. Because once a student governance council is already made up, They already have their 14 members. I don't have student governance councils in any other meetings at the high school, like trying to promote volunteers or family engagement or anything like that. That's truly the parents that are already involved in the activities. I don't know.
You mean the school governance council, Diana?
Yes.
So,
Like-
yeah.
Like,
I
I
would
don't.
agree with that as well. It seems more like PTA driven,
Mhm.
PTO driven as far as trying to get more participation going. You know, like I was kind of saying before, I think there's different people. Sometimes there are people that are on both of these, that are on the PTOs and PTAs and on the SGCs. But I think you have really a focus in the PTAs about, well, one, raising money for the schools, which requires a lot of participation from parents typically to do so. So I think they're always trying to gear and get little events going as well to try and bring people in. The SGCs don't seem to do as much of that. Like there's not really events that they do or seem to sponsor to bring in participation.
And I guess even participation around the meetings, you know, being mindful of who is being represented. Like,
That actually is stated though, a little higher up. I believe,
but I see your point, Janine and Diana, and that it was a question, and thank you for that.
Well, thank you for bringing that up.
Ralph, are you looking at the purpose and definition?
yes,
That's
yeah,
just kind of like the general sort of phrasing. I think that might be encompassing a little bit of what you're saying, Godfrey. But
Yeah,
also
you know, am
what
I
Diana-
making decisions?
But
as
also what Diana
Godfrey?
is saying, yeah.
Yeah, like on governance council, would I be making decisions as Godfrey or, you know, fathers in the school community that I think I, you know, represent or have a relationship that I can share information about what's happening to, you know, is that a charge of mine? Just to, because it is, you know, impactful information that's being decided on at the level, and there's always a challenge of how and when people find out. And I don't know if that naturally sits with a PTA or if that naturally sits with, you know, any other, again, being mindful of the roles being played, the engagement.
yeah. I do think though that the you know, getting back to your first point there with that, Godfrey, that the goal of these is that as you build out your membership, that you actually have representation from all groups, so from fathers and others that are you know, all part of the group, and that's how you come to that council, is to be able to help represent your whole larger community as a whole, which I'm sure originally is why there had to be 7 parent members on board in the school governance council to be able to get representation, at least from a state level, when they were trying to look at making sure that there was representation from all stakeholders. I have a feeling that was probably the reason why there was a number of people, a number of parents that had to be on there, and that's the largest number.
Plus, PTAs and PTOs are also the ones that are looking for these parents, or are the parents that move up to SBCs from the PTOs and PTAs. By the way, I just thought of why it's in the fall and not May.
Oh,
It may not be the full explanation, but it has to do with students, like you said, juniors and seniors that are applying for colleges and FAFSA and all of that. They have to have all that information in the fall prior to putting in their transcripts and the titles of groups that they have been. If they wait until May,
Yeah.
then that period of application has already passed, and they can't put it into National Honor Society or the college applications.
That sounds
Sounds
reasonable.
like an answer Ethan would say.
What?
You
Oh,
Is there a
that sounds like
reason
an
why-
answer Ethan would say,
Yes.
but no, it had me thinking and thinking. I'm going September, May. Yeah,
Yeah.
We've
Okay,
got
Then we don't put everybody in September then?
just the high schools are the ones.
the high schools, yeah.
Yeah, there was, and yeah, it did have a rationale to do with the students specifically. I know that, but I just can't remember what it was. And you probably just hit it right on the head, Diana.
Well, so I mean, we kind of got into the broader like subject of SGC and the purpose, but I kind of just want to circle back to what we think our final decision is on paragraph 1 for the duties of council members.
I think we should include a number of meetings. I think it was mentioned earlier, like whether to have quarterly, whatever cadence, I think it should be at least said. So that's pretty concrete. You know, to minimize loose interpretations.
Well, the language here does give a minimum requirement of at least 1 meeting per year.
But I recall coming back at the largest school government council meetings and hearing about like subgroups that met at an intense frequency, you know, more than the school governance council actually met, which differed from, you know.
Oh, the committees.
Yeah, you know, and I think having a minimum or being clear around just like concretely would help establish an understanding that's shared across all school levels. Because some high schools or middle schools weren't able to meet at the same frequency or because of different school needs, had a focus elsewhere that didn't require subgroup participation, more so like individual task completion. It made it hard to like really assess how we were doing because of how the wide variety in things and meetings that were occurring at individual schools.
So
It was all over the place.
So one thing we can do is we can add in, and tell me if this makes sense. I believe that, you know, it could be, you'd want to say probably 4 meetings that are focused around the main goals. There's a minimum of 4 meetings for every year for any governance council, one that covers mission and vision, one that covers budget, one that covers the academic portion of it, and then the other part that covers training. So it, you know, like I said, it covers your main, you can have more meetings than that if it's available, but there's at least that minimum requirement. And those are really the key areas that you want to have your governance council focus on.
yeah, that sounds clear. And I like the
Mhm.
idea of 4 that divides into the quarters of the year. And so that sounds good, and it gives a little structure to what has to go on in at least 4 of the meetings. So I like that.
Yeah, well, and I think
Me too.
those are covered in numbers 2, 3, and 4, those specific
Mhm.
points. Now, if you leave 1 in, that actually helps as well. That covers all those criteria. But we can add in just to make sure that there's a minimum of 4 meetings instead of 12.
Should we articulate where meeting videos should be accessible or that they should be made accessible?
School governance council meetings are open to all parents of the school and public. We did add some language about,
Like accessible on the school's website, accessible via the district Twitter. There's like just be mindful of how we articulate where the public can access what we've discussed.
I think that might be getting more into the macro of this, which might be more of a regulation, something we want to veer towards in terms of regulations versus the policy itself, which we want to keep just kind of like on the broader scale.
And I think that's more of an operational piece. Like, so we don't have a policy that states
Right.
where we post our board meetings, but
But this
have
piece of
operational.
information, I think, creates inequity. You know, just simply being clear about where to go to find.
I think
My
that,
governance, you should be at least able to say or have an idea that's, not different from the next person, because they have a more intimate resource. But again, just the expectation of where to post and where to find it.
so my suggestion with that, Godfrey, would be to actually work with our communications department so it's standard for everybody.
Yes,
So every website will have it at the same spot. And I don't know if it would go in the policy, but it would actually be something we'd work on with communication to make sure that that's standardized and operationalized, just like we operationalize our own YouTube channel. And that I make sure that, the board meetings are posted the next day and the translations are actually posted the following day and so forth. I just don't know if I don't know if it needs to be in, that's just my suggestion. I don't know if that needs to be in a policy, but it should be definitely an operational piece and an expectation that we explain to parents to do. If it's something like that, though, that's getting into what I'd consider the weeds, it would be then, if we wanted to do it, I'd recommend it as a regulation. Because that communications piece could change from year to year, depending on how technology and other things change, and you don't want to have to keep changing the policy.
Where the information is going to be housed. Is it going to be on the district website? It's going to be on each school website. And so you want to give some autonomy there. Obviously you want to make it consistent, but again, you're putting something like that in the policy, that really does seem to be more of a regulation issue, or even something that would be discussed at these meetings where you're talking about what the vision and mission is. And also this is where you're going to find this information.
Well, I don't know, I think it deserves more debate, because when I think about the things that interrupt, communities like ours, the dis and misinformation that happens, simply starts with everyone not being clear, being mindful of the context here in Norwalk. Would it be helpful for everyone to just simply know that I'm gonna be clear that I can find either here or there? Just to help at least assure people have an opportunity to stay engaged with their school governance. And then there's an expectation that people should look for, just for where they can find schools information being discussed.
How are we listed? It's not, is it listed on ours or no? We just tell people verbally that it's on the website.
Whether we tell them or it's listed, there's a clear understanding where they know to get it, versus their individual school. And there's nothing here when I'm reviewing that establishes that intent, or at least, minimal assurance that this is always clearly able to be articulated. It's a small matter, I'm not saying every week you got to update it, but just where to go find it. 4 meetings, all right.
I'm just thinking of how you can do that. Can you at all link it to just the website? The NPS website, the way people can find when the BOE meetings are? Is there any way to?
That's also a discussion that, superintendent and the team can have and discuss to see how they want to have that put in place.
Definitely
And
the
what's
communication.
the easiest way. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's a good conversation to have with communications, because once again, I go back to our regular policy, and Godfrey, I don't know if I'm answering the question that you're asking, but we don't have a policy that we post on YouTube every one of our meetings, but we use through the communications department, we make sure that everybody knows and is clear where to be able to get those meetings and where to be able to go to. On our agendas, we always make sure that we post the link. We make sure that we post the meeting minutes and everything else. But if it was in a policy, if we changed from YouTube, then you got to change your whole policy. So I think that the question becomes is like, what are the operational expectations and how do we get to where we need to be? And I think that that's important for our communications department to really standardize and make sure that that messaging is there. And I'd look at
Well-
those things as regulations.
What you're saying, NOAC doesn't have it articulated. We're clear what the General Assembly expects of us, so people know what a FOIA, information around the board. Having it mentioned here, would you know what to FOIA or where, in terms of the capacity to really just simply have things in place that support what it's meant to, can they abide by the Freedom of Information Act if it's not a publicized meeting or agendas are sent out? In the sense of, the community knows how to hold us accountable. They're not pointing to no policies. It's policy specific of a board like us and how it operates. Simply articulating expectation, it will be made accessible and how to the community is what I'm proposing, not the where, how, what. But a community like ours and, being plagued with communication and misinformation, it's worth, articulating.
Well, I think, Godfrey, you bring up a good point, and that is something that we address later on. Just because kind of you mentioned FOIs, because originally the language for other provisions just said school governance council meetings are open to all parents of the public school and public. And we've added this additional language in red, and school governance council shall comply with applicable provisions of the FOI, Freedom of Information Act.
That's interesting. You added that.
So we
So-
could add something on saying that, once, if meetings will also be posted in a public area. I mean, something simple like that could go in the policy, but I wouldn't want to, just personally, I don't think we want to get into the weeds of like how we do that. That's communications, and that could change, from year to year, depending on how technology changes too.
You want to leave it open-ended, you mean, so that it doesn't matter, but that it is open to the public, okay.
But
And that was
getting-
part of the original language, right? School governance council meetings are open to all parents of the
Yes.
school and public.
Okay,
Um,
it's a good idea.
But
Are we
we kind of got ahead of ourselves, and Godfrey, that's a really good point.
Are we ready to go back to number one? I'm
So we're
looking at that sentence, conducting at least one meeting.
For
If we do,
meeting?
if we
You wanna
do change
that
it,
to 4, right?
if you do change it to 4, then you have to change the sentence because it doesn't make sense. If you just say conducting at least 4 meetings per year, to which all parents and teachers of the school are invited, period. At one of the meetings, the vision and mission and goals shall be discussed.
How about evolutions?
Oh. I didn't know if somebody else said that all of a sudden. Okay, conducting at least 4 meetings per year to which all parents and teachers of the school are invited. And then Mary Ellen, I think you're kind of building off what Ralph was saying, that we kind of assign what each meeting should be.
Right, so put a
Okay.
period after invited because
Yeah.
you can't, one of them is going to be the vision, one is going to be budget, one is going to be accountability, and one is going to be, what did we say, the training?
Yeah, and
Training should probably be the first.
Well, my feeling towards this, I think they need to be in there, but I don't know if you want to say each, there has to be one meeting dedicated to each.
Right?
You may want to say that the topics that need to be included are those 4 topics, and there's 4 meetings. People would assume
Yes.
that, but you may be able to, in certain years, your budget meeting may take 2 meetings, let's say you wanted to have, whereas you can do the vision and training in one meeting. So, but I do think you have to have them outlined as 4, at least a minimum of 4 meetings. And these are 4 topics that no matter what have to be covered.
During
Yeah.
which these topics of training,
So Training,
topics.
vision, budget, and accountability shall be discussed and evaluated.
yes.
It's a 2-year term, right?
What's our term limits?
And then the second sentence is deleted.
Oh. And so then everybody, well, I just want to make sure. This is how it would look. So. Why don't we just kind of take a minute?
I'm good with that.
Say that again. Diana, I didn't hear you.
I said I'm good with that.
There has to be a comma after training because it's different from vision.
Oh,
Got it.
Mary Ellen, you taught English?
Yes. Yeah, actually. Plus, I went to a grammar school. I'm that old. Grammar school. Isn't that funny that they used to call elementary schools grammar schools? Ralph, you're
I'm
nodding your
fine.
head. But Godfrey, you don't even know about that, right?
I mean, it all depends what language you're telling me that in. You know, it looks fine to me, these changes.
Okay. I particularly like the change that said serve as an advisory capacity. That's just so clear. And I think people get tripped up in that a little bit with the lack of clarity.
Okay, if there's no other questions on this, let's continue. We have 20 minutes.
oh, wow.
Yeah, and Barbara, I can hammer out a couple of these quick ones on the next page, because we did number 5. We talked about the teacher piece.
Right.
The first sentence that was included in this that we struck out was when these governance councils were originally made. You can see the sentence talks about changes of school hours, days of operation, school enrollment goals. That had a lot to do with even when we were talking about Kendall being a year-round school, those kinds of issues. So really, the governance council is more of the advisory piece. So striking that out, and then talking about enrollment is once again, the parents having deciding on that piece would be another area that really kind of is not advisory anymore. So the recommendation is to make those couple of changes. The obviously the compact with parents and developing involvement policies for parents as well. 8 and 9 would be logical to keep there. Numbers 10, 11, 12, and 13 once again get into weeds about some things that we felt were maybe not looked at as potentially advisory. But it's stuff that does come up in these governance councils. So having the governance council come up to the board for number 11, where talked about facility needs, that's really something that facilities should be focused on. But if there's issues, the governance council should be bringing it up to facilities, and it should be managed that way. Same thing with the selection of the before and after school programs for the school. They should know what's going on, but those decisions really are more in alignment with the principal, similar of just not getting into the weeds of hiring the teachers. Providing the need for school uniforms was another thing that was getting very specific, that can be discussed with. There's no reason for governance council not to discuss that, but they're acting in an advisory board, and the way this was originally written, it sounded a little bit more like they were making those specific decisions. So these were a couple specifics that we looked at, just striking out and cleaning up the language.
So Ralph, can we say again that what you've crossed out in no way crosses out the state definition
Oh,
or the state
No, state has nothing to this.
outline?
No.
So we
yeah,
just put those in, maybe the clothes, the school uniforms, maybe that was kind of popular in that year. People were talking about it and you put that in. But looking at it now, it seems so specific that it should be more, not in a policy, but in a regulation or a practice of some
If
sort.
if it's needed, it would be in regulation, yeah.
I think
Okay,
that's
so-
important to state that if things are needed, that it be in regulation, because there are people who believe that power is being taken away from the SGCs. So there's that feel as well. So I think it's important that, we discuss and say that, certain important pieces would be in our regulations.
Exactly. That's where I could imagine some ruffled feathers here when we're crossing out things that it has a sense of you're taking away what we had before. And to stress again that this is more in alignment with what the state is requiring, and then a better understanding of the difference between policy and regulation, and that they're really I think this is focusing on several things and eliminating what has not been critical for their role.
So would it be safe to say, if I stated this correctly, that the items that we're removing are things that, potentially, once again, can cause people to think that the SGCs are not in the same capacity that they've been in the past, which is not the case, but we could explain that these things could be brought back in regulation. My advice would be, I can talk to Rob, and as we do the training, we also just take briefly to explain what we've removed out of the change we made to the policy quickly, or we can have the consultant explain those changes, and then just actually get feedback on what things should be, potentially things that they think that could be, brought back as a regulation. And that may be the best way to approach it, but to clean up the policy itself, to actually be more compliant with the way that we want it to be, and move forward, so that you're not making constant changes.
Yes, I think that's a good
Exactly.
idea. But the one sentence under 10 about such advice shall be informed by an annual survey of parent satisfaction with aspects of school quality and school achievement. I think that number 10 should 100% be in a written regulation. And perhaps even the annual survey of parent satisfaction, it could be stated that it's the panoramic
Panorama survey, yeah.
survey instead of just the annual survey. Say it's a panoramic survey, so people aren't thinking, oh, I have to make up a survey. I can use what's out there, and that will be used to inform and produce data on what perceptions are by parents. I think that's a very strong regulation, actually. That's more data driven instead of just cozy feelings.
And I think the last one, number 15 there, we didn't strike it out. It can stay, but it's kind of redundant.
It's totally redundant.
Yeah.
Everybody has a school governance, so it doesn't,
Would everyone be okay with that change?
Yes.
Fine.
Yes.
Perfect. Moving on to the committee, study groups and task force. Again, there's been no change in this language.
Provisions, the
la-
only thing,
Oh, go ahead, Ralph.
no, I was just gonna say with the provisions, the only change that we made is you've already covered, which is adding an FOI.
Portion, yeah.
Are we going to add something to what Godfrey was talking about? So school governance committees are open to all parents of the school and the public with internet access or internet, how do we say that? So that, to Godfrey's point, that it's open to the public, but it's also open not just at that time, but it can be looked at later because of a digital record.
Yeah, it's
So whether it's
accessible the same-
YouTube in the future or something else, 10 years from now, but it's open to the public and it's open for the public to look at
And
after.
available for viewing, right?
Thank you. And available for viewing.
Ralph, do you think,
So the only thing I'm wondering though is, and this is, I don't have this answer, but then does every school governance council have to be a virtual meeting then to be recorded?
Ah,
So, this is a question of like, you want to bring parents in, you want to have activities. Those aren't necessarily things that you want to you don't want to kind of say that everyone's going to be accessible via the internet, because if it's an event that they're having or it just may not.
yeah, that's a strong point.
In the sense of the meetings being accessible to the public in the same way, whether you can find a transcript at this point or ever. But, when I look at the role and the impact of the school governance council, for us to not assure that there is a practice and policy that makes what is being discussed on their behalf available.
Yes.
I just want to, make sure we don't lose context of things that have interrupted this from happening in this community. Various reasons, being in a city community, but I just don't want to lose sight of that, and it's part of Norwalk's context.
Did I lose connection? It got really, really quiet.
Oh, we're here.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm
okay.
here. I'm here.
It was like I heard dead silence.
We all had a moment of nothing to say.
Yeah, so
I think you left us thinking.
yeah,
I'm pondering some things. I'm just wondering, Barbara, when if we're in a position of explaining why so many things are deleted, I'm asking myself, why was that written? For example, this one on informing the Board of Education relative to the school's facility need. That just seems like that's not following the usual way of going through things. Yes, as was mentioned before, that the facility group would come report to us later on, but it needs to be reported to the facility.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that it's not discussed at a school governance council meeting, but the way that it was worded here, it seemed like it was their responsibility to bring that up, and it really is.
Yeah,
It's-
to report to the Board of Ed about that.
Right.
Yeah, it's
But I
under
think-
duties.
Well, I think
I
less
also-
report, there's advocacy. The structure for, if there's something you want to fight for your school, the platform and what's the path you go to advocate for that. I think we should be clear in how that expectation gets met. If it's the process that has to be re-articulated, we re-articulate that, but the expectations should stand firm and clear that we do want to hear from you. And if
Yeah. No, that's a definite, Gottfried. I think that's right. But I think that's really the once you get into those and that gets back to what you talked about with operational expectations, and that goes back to the training as well.
Plus, we also have to remember that we are going over all of these policies that have been in effect for quite some time, because we haven't been able to go through every single policy. And even though we meet once a month, that's one policy, that's only 12 a year, unless we can fit in more. But we are cleaning them up. We're not making huge changes. And now that we have the training moving forward, a lot of this will fall into training, and I'm sure it'll be in their notes and things that they can discuss, and what the chain of command is and how to report something in facilities. Because number 11, for example, just says informing the Board of Education about school facility needs. I mean, that could mean calling me, calling Mary Ellen, calling Janine, without any real form of notifying us, right? So I think with the training, it'll be more detailed as to how, when, why, and the importance of it. And also the discussion of the I should say chain of command once it comes to us, in discussion of where it fits in the facilities operations of fixing things. But yeah, so this is a perfect example of a policy of what we're going to look at moving forward, of so many different policies, of what's operational, what's regulation, what's policy, and the cleanup that needs to be done, because it's almost trying to make it simple enough for you to find what you need, but at the same time, not, very detailed. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense, Diana. It makes a lot of sense. And I'm just taking notes on that operational versus regulation and then training. So it's really an education for me, but it's an education for parents also, that policy isn't, it gives you a general idea. It doesn't limit you.
Correct.
You can certainly, and you're expected to do more than the policy. And when you have questions, that some of the training should help you understand the differences.
Correct.
Yeah, so clearly the SGC it advocates for their school, and they should be able to let us know things. But they first have to figure out how the whole thing works.
Yeah. And a point of clarification, we are expecting every school to have a school governance council in the district.
Yes.
And currently, does every school have a school governance council?
Yes. Yes. This was the old policy that all the school governance councils in every building followed.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for how many years, Ralph? How many years does it last?
I think I want to say it's probably only been since we moved to the site-based model of budgeting. So it's probably 4 or 5 years.
Site-based model, and that was under what superintendent? Just generally, is that?
Under Dr. Adamowski. So
Okay, Adamowski. Okay.
School-based, not site, right?
Yeah, school-based, yeah.
Want to misconfuse people with every program.
Okay. Whew. We really worked hard on that.
See?
So there is one last comment though, Diane, at the end. I think that's the last thing that we wanted to make sure that people understood, and our attorney actually agreed that we should keep this in there, is sometimes the limitations. One thing we want to make sure is that people understand what the advisory council is necessarily not. They're not the managers of the school. They're not the supervising staff. They don't enter into contracts for the school. They shouldn't be discussing individual issues between teachers and students. They shouldn't be determining student eligibility for admission. They shouldn't be making any determinations of class allocations or where students are. So it's some of these things that we want to make sure that they also are aware of, that's really not not in the purview of an advisory role. But
Right.
that's really more administration. And
And we're not taking away anything from them. It's just like the Board of Education, we have to, stay within our lanes too. And there's certain things that we're allowed to discuss and change and vote on. And there's other things that we do not get involved because it's more operational. But it's basically the same thing. The importance is that we are not taking away anything, just explaining the responsibilities of this policy.
And I think that's a great point, because ultimately goal for this, right, is you want to be sure that people understand what their role is. I think that's been kind of the repeated theme throughout this. We want the SGC to understand their role, and nothing's been eliminated. It's clarifying what their role is, on what areas they provide advice on, and not limiting in any way to some of those specific macro ones that were previously named, but also this is also guidance from the state about what the limitations are for SGCs. So this is not something that we have unilaterally decided. This is guidance that we're getting from the state statute about what the limitations of an SGC are, which just kind of further clarifies that role. And it doesn't leave people in that gray space of, well, what is my role here? What am I engaging in? What can I move forward with or can't?
Mhm.
And
So I'm-
that is always a continuous process, because new parents are coming in. It's even after you've stated something so clearly, it needs to be rotated in again and again for each new person.
Hence the training, like we get trained yearly, multiple times a year, and it's,
Yes.
new members, old members, veteran members, we all need to be reminded and trained too. Okay.
Question I had was, the recommendation was to put the limitations in our policy or
Yeah.
articulate it somewhere?
In our
In the
policy.
policy.
Okay. And what we were referencing were Shipman and Goodwin recommended series of policies, or there's not one for this?
there is none for a school governance council.
Okay.
So, yeah, so what we did we did share this with Shipman and Goodwin for comments and, recommendations from the red lines that we presented tonight, including this piece here. And one of the comments from Shipman and Goodwin was this actually does make sense to keep in this, and it actually helps to clarify, just like I said, roles and responsibilities.
So Ralph, just to go back on what you just said, did you just say that there's not a state policy on SGC? Did you just say that?
No, there's not. We adopted model policies from Shipman and Goodwin.
Yes, of course.
So there is no model policy for school governance. There is a state mandates and stuff around school governance councils for schools that need them, that are the high need schools. Yes. And this
Okay,
is
and so
this is
what
in
we were
compliance with
looking at was the state mandated parts to this SGC. We were looking at that, but it's not a state policy that every school has to abide by. Yeah. All right. So that's just a little wrinkle. I mean, a little doll inside of a doll. It's a little mysterious that it's not a policy that was given to us by the legal group. I think it might be helpful just previous to where, of course, you won't use possible additions because, it'll be in it. But before you say limitations, that you cite that is from the state.
Sure.
So that it's clear that it's not from the Board of Education in Norwalk. We're leaning on what the state has put down as limitations to the SGC.
Sure.
And do we have a date on that when the state put this information out?
I believe they actually created their governance council policies back in like, I think it was 2011, 2012, as I'd mentioned earlier. That's when they had originally come out.
So do you
Um,
think the limitations come from 2011?
Well, it's
I think
kind
there
of.
was an
paraphrasing
update to
here.
the,
Yeah.
oh, no, the
Oh.
Public Act was in 2010. 2012.
Yeah, so if we can just change the verbiage there. State limitations. But look, Mary Ellen, as we were discussing about policies, that policy was adopted in 2016. So imagine how many policies there are still left to go over and discuss like this one. That's why I said in our last meeting that not every meeting's going to go really fast, because we will be looking in the detail of all the policies. And this is a great example of one.
If I may, I want to share the screen
Mhm.
regarding SGC responsibilities from the State Department of Education that's in alignment with the Public Act. So I'm going, and I think the suggestion is to include this link so that people understand these limitations aren't from us. So let me see if I can go to a new share. So we see the Connecticut State Department of Education, School Governance
Yes.
Council responsibilities, right?
Yes.
And so they're in alignment with the Public Acts, which this is what the Public Act is, if you want to actually look at the citation. I also have it on Westlaw, but I don't think everybody wants to look at that. But specifically, let's look here, right? And I
Mhm.
think this might be helpful, including this link in the
Policy.
so that way there's an understanding that this wasn't just some unilateral determination that we made about what and I know that wording can kind of come across a little harsh, limitations, but this is not something that we've decided.
Mhm.
And so we can add that. I'm happy to do so. Oh, Mary Ellen, I think you're on mute.
I'm good with that. How about everybody else?
I am good with that, and I'm also mindful of communication is so important between ourselves and with the community at large, and that if we approach this as when you understand where your limits are and you understand where your duties are, it's easier to fulfill your roles. And so that's the whole thrust here. Nobody is taking away anything. It's
Correct.
trying to help you understand what's my role as an advocate of my children in my school. And I'm going to take on an added responsibility of SGC. What's my role here? So your role is this, your duties are this, but your duties are not that. You might intuitively think, yeah, I am managing the school, but no, that's not your job. This is your job, and we need everybody to help. So it's that I'm just going over the thinking points of sharing this with the public and with each other.
Well, when we discussed this at the meeting, at the business meeting, when with the full board, that is something that we can discuss at that time. But yeah, I think adding the link is very important because, there's been members of the community that always say they don't know where to look for anything. And I think adding links to our policies moving forward is huge. So I like that idea.
I like that idea. Also, can we highlight the section we want them to look at?
Oh, that's getting a little tech savvy. So Ralph.
We'd have to just download it because it's actually, this is the state website. We can't go in and change their website.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Okay, so you could link, but can you link just to a page? I don't want them to be linked to the whole.
Yeah, no, it can be linked to these two
Yeah.
pages that you're seeing.
Yeah.
Okay,
Regarding youth role, are we saying at every school level, there's youth membership on the board, governance council? And
Not- only high school, isn't it? Just high school.
that was a question. Okay,
Students, high school council members only.
only.
Because of age, correct?
I don't want to say yes definitively, but I would assume that yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Can we bring it up with all the highlights so we can take one quick look,
Okay, so wait, now I've shared so many screens.
please?
Oh, okay. Do we have any of my screens open or I need to reshare?
I see you.
Oh. Let me-
Yeah, I see each other.
I think we're here, right?
Yep.
Yes, okay.
So
Mhm.
that's page 1. This is page 2. The red items were the addition. Page 3, we're going to leave paragraph 1 with the suggested changes and remove this
Mhm.
sentence. Without changing the substance of what SGCs are required to do, we've removed some of this language here. Their duties and responsibilities. Specifically 15 was redundant. I think you pointed out, Mary Ellen.
Mhm.
There's been no changes to the committees, study groups, or task force. For other provisions, we've added this portion about freedom of information. And I think there's still the question of how is it made available to the general public? And then we are going to add this section with the link to what I previously provided in terms of limitations. And I don't necessarily think what we can do is we can remove this language, right? And we can move this further up. And maybe we want to put it under, do we want to put that language about limitations under duties of council members, just as like a subsection? So they know these are my duties, but this is kind of the line in the sand.
Okay, but the one thing I recommend is right before it, you say state. The state limitations. Even though there's going to be a link, that you also say that it's from a state document.
Maybe we should put it under other provisions. What are our thoughts about where we want to house this ultimately section? We can do something like.
I think it's really important. So
how about we do its own subsection? Will include the link and we'll include the language, just so we can kind of see how it would look. Obviously, this is not the final, but just so we can get a feel. Right. State limitations, and we'll clean this up a bit. And then we'll have the reporting and oversight.
Looks good.
right.
I'll make all the final edits, clean it up. Ralph, anything?
No, definitely. And so our next steps are obviously, moving it on to the board.
Any final questions from the board members?
I'm good, thank you.
I am as well.
Godfrey? Thank you. Mary
Um,
Ellen?
I'm good with it. I just ask that I would like to look at it before we have our board meeting. Will it be?
No, we have to vote on, you can look at it, but we have to vote on it to move it to the full board.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. I would like to look at it. So if, how could I do that, Ralph? Could I look at it before we have the next board meeting? Could
Well, we
look
have
at
to
it?
vote for it. We have to vote for it now to move it, but you can see it before the meeting. He could
Yes,
send it to us. He could send it to us to review it.
To-
But if we're all comfortable
Yes.
with these changes, additions and everything,
I'm comfortable.
can I see everybody, please? Just take that off the screen. Thank you so much. All right, with no other questions or comments, I need a motion to move this to the full board, please.
I make a motion.
Okay, motioned by Mary Ellen, seconded by Godfrey. Thank you. Everyone in favor of moving this to the full board, say aye, raise your hand. Aye. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you.
Great. Thank
All
you. And
right.
Diana, we'll get a copy before the end of the week because I do have to have a clean draft for the
Mhm.
for the trainer to use as well, so they can start planning. So we have to do it anyways this week.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody, so much, and thank you
Thank
for,
you.
the extra time. I know that we ran a little later than expected, but this is also why I needed to add that extra half hour, because I know that before I would just keep pushing. So at least this way we got it all done in the hour and 45 minutes. So
Mhm.
thank you, everybody, and have
Yeah,
a good
thank you,
evening.
Barbara and Ralph, for your work.
Of course.
Thank
Good
you.
going. Thanks,
Good
Diana.
night.